Hi, everyone. My name is James. I'm going to be talking about a paper that I found from the Journal of Business Psychology. It's called Leadership and Organizational Culture Linking CEO Characteristics to Cultural Values. Um, so, this article was really interesting to find. I can't remember exactly the rabbit hole that I went down where I found this, but this has been a great read. Like it really has been a great read on some major points from a CEO perspective. And I'll get into this in just a second, but just to give you sort of the very high level executive summary, it's it really does help to get to the quantitative data of how executive leadership affects organizational culture. That's probably one of the better ways that I've figured out how to describe this. So here uh, uh, in this slide, we can see that all of the credentials here for this group that did this work. You can find them uh, pretty easily through the Baker Library. So, the main points that I wanted to go over in this, but very quickly because I wanted to liken this more to real life, um, sort of real world impact and what I see or what I think are the more impressive facts here in the real world implications that they have. So the first point here, the paper really didn't exist before, other than a bunch of other research in the field that made the assumptions that the CEO had a pretty large involvement in the overall organizational culture. Um, a lot of people would just say, well, yeah, sure. Right. But what this group did, and which I thought was really interesting, was they sought to bring a more quantitative perspective to it and to really try to find out if there are statistically significant differences between certain behaviors, certain characteristics, and these kinds of things, and how that impacts the overall organizational culture that also surveyed the you have one CEO in a company, you have multiple people within a company. Everybody surveyed, albeit very small, and they do indicate that in the limitations section of this paper. But the interesting thing here is that this paper really, I think that they did indicate in this paper that it is one of the first, if not the first, attempt to quantitate the behaviors of the CEO and the characteristics of the CEO to a broader organizational population. So that's my take on it. Here are some other quotes here, or some other lines that one of the things that I thought was very interesting, and that's in this the third bullet here. An organization's culture does not form randomly, right? And I kind of touched on that, and that a CEO's strategic and operational decisions are a reflection of the CEO's characteristics. So what's really kind of interesting there, though, is that this the assumptions that have been made in the past really, and observations just really point to the CEO as being that that figurehead, right? That point at which all of the rest of the company kind of comes from. And most people, I think, would say, if you stop them on the street, would say, well, duh. Like, are you kidding me? Like, of course this is. But when we answer questions that way, we don't necessarily move into the, okay, well, how much, or what are the statistics behind that? And that's what I thought was really cool about this paper, is that they really did kind of take a step back and ask that question: what are the statistics? What are the well, just first off, what are the statistics, and are they significant or statistically significant to the kind of behavior that is exhibited in, and or perceived behavior that's exhibited in the organization surveyed by the greater population of that organization. And you'll see me looking down because I have this article right here. So if you see me looking down and peeling through some stuff, that's what this is. But so yeah, no, like this paper is actually a lot of fun, and it really does kind of like peel the I don't want to say peel the layers back on CEO behavior and organizational culture, but it definitely does help to understand from a more mathematical and statistical basis what is going on, and where I would say that, as a stats minor, I would say that the best way that you would interpret those data are that you would say what your likelihoods are. That's about it. Anyway, moving on to the reflections of the text. So I found that reading this entire chapter of strategic leadership, and it just all of these concepts that were in this article were broadly defined, and not broadly defined, but explained at length within the chapter, but not necessarily to the nomenclature that exists within this paper. Within this paper, we have clan culture values, we have adhocracy, culture values, market culture values, hierarchical. That wasn't necessarily described or identified verbatim in the text. However, each one of these were well characterized in the text. When you look at clan culture, oriented towards collaboration, flexibility, and internal maintenance, that was well described throughout the chapter. The entire chapter really, captured a lot of that sentiment along with the other sentiments here. But this paper and the reference that they had to each one of these components, Cameron in 2007 was in this article, and it really helped to link a lot of what the text authors were saying, and to what a lot of the modern, I would say modern, if not the just overall thinking of how you would go about finding statistically significant results with such a qualitative subject. So that's where I think that this is really pretty fun. And I think there's some other things that are really fun after thinking about this, and just kind of thinking about this in real world perspective. I mean, we can see all of these points on what the text reflects, what this reflects, and that's great, um, because it does reflect reality. Uh, when you are in an organization and that organization, is trying to implement a change to keep up with who knows what, depending on where you are. I mean, you're going to be in the who knows what kind of like area, but I mean, it, the farther up you go, the more and more information you get is sort of where that's going. But the when you see, or when you're in a company, I should say, when you're in a company that basically goes through an entire merger with another company, a joint venture, like a smashing of two business units of two greater corporations, but they just smash them together, right? And they say, here's the CEO of this new joint venture, this new corporation, this new whatever. It's gonna be tough, and the cultures smashing together. That's another one. I mean, that just from executive on down, that's where it gets crazy. And I went through exactly this that I'm describing. I actually went through this, and I'll just say it right now. I mean, I'm fine with saying it because it's public. I mean, Q Squared Solutions, right? It's a joint venture of Quest Diagnostics, where if you've ever gotten a drug test, it's either gone through LabCorp or Quest, right? So that's, yeah. And then Quintiles Laboratories. Quintiles Laboratories was a company that served 100% of its business model, served pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, or maybe, but pharmaceutical companies trying to bring a drug to market, and needed the laboratory services to do safety testing, those kinds of things in a clinical trial. I'm not going to get into it, but those two came together, and they were two hugely different cultures. Just hugely different cultures, different systems, different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking about things. And when you start climbing up and up and up and up and up, you start seeing that there are differences. There's just differences within the executive leadership teams all the way through, until you get to the leader of this, smashed company, right? So what they need to do is to figure out how they're going to make sure that the big picture of what the company is trying to do is met, right? And you have to be able to do that through your personnel. And I think that's a really good time to switch to the next slide, because that actually, I think that's part of the takeaway of this article, and it's part of the takeaway of a lot of the takeaway, I think, of chapter 12 in the text, is really that leadership does play an enormous portion of the organization's culture. But leadership really needs to be aware of the changing times, and also be aware that leadership needs to be aware that leadership may need to change in certain circumstances. And that's kind of hard to do, but I think, though, that there are certain other examples where you find people that are rewarded for being really good at a particular function. If we want to talk about CEOs in business, where you're at that, where you're moving along, and then you start to grow, right? Well, you can grow and grow and grow, but if you don't have CEOs or leadership or people in the position here to take you up here versus just continue a linear progression, if you don't have that, if you don't put the right people in the right seat for the right task, and in this case, the right task may be that change, yeah, I mean, you might really get into a position to where you just bottleneck yourself as a business, and if you're the CEO of that business, you may bottleneck yourself with talent. Talent that is talented, but in the wrong seat at the wrong time, if that makes sense. So again, this article really was to investigate empirical evidence of the relationship of the CEO, their personality, who they are as a person, really, their characteristics, and how that impacts an organization's culture. And it does. And what they found is that there are statistics that would indicate that is the case. However, I think that this paper, while fun, I mean, like, it was really a fun paper to read, it was really thin on its conclusions. It didn't really bring the definitive final nail in the coffin, whatever euphemism makes sense here. It didn't bring that to the table, but that's fine. As a former researcher, I've written papers, I've published before. I mean, like, what you do is you describe your results, and that's fine. But what I think is really amazing about this is that it is, and as the authors describe it here, this is the first work that they can find on attempting to quantitate something as qualitative as the behavior of a CEO and that behavior or that behavior's impact on the greater organization. And they go through many different models here. Again, I'm not going to go through any of the math here. I will definitely make sure that the link or the citation is in the forum. That way you can go to it if you want to go see it and read it. I really think, though, that as thin as the conclusions in this piece are, they do, I think, indicate where the path is on a very interesting path forward in being able to quantitate such a qualitative field and something that has been traditionally sort of, I don't want to say artistic, but when you have CEOs that just seem to be CEOs and then they become CEOs, you have friends like that. It's like, how on earth, what's going on here? Whether or not, that's right for everyone, that's not the case. But being able to have a little bit more of a quantitative approach to that dynamic and that observation in nature that we see. something along those lines. I think that's really what this paper is attempting to lay the foundation to, and it's been a really really fun read with that in mind. So highly recommend it. Yeah, definitely highly recommend the read here. It's the key point here is that management, leadership, and executive leadership, all the way up, have a huge responsibility in being able to keep the organization's culture where it needs to be for the organization's strategic plan. And what I mean by that is that there are many, many, many different things that the organization needs to think about externally, to remain competitive, to remain relevant and strong within the market, such that it keeps people employed. But yeah, there are huge implications to this particular kind of method to going about identifying CEOs, future CEOs, or prospective CEOs, these kinds of things. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. There's a lot of real life. It's complex, but there's a lot of some really great real life in this article. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I look forward to seeing your comments. Thank you so much.